they have the express power to tax.
They have the express power to tax.
Tax, but that's an amendment. That wasn't in the original.
Okay, actually, Congress in Article 1, it does mention in there they've got the power of the purse. They've got that. Their power to tax is mentioned in there. Now, having said this, when you think about it, an express power is going to be one that is specifically written in the Constitution, whether it's in the original or whether it's in an amendment. And tax is one that is allowed in there. So that's express. What was implied to contrast it?
It wasn't in the Constitution, but they just kind of like implied that this rule relates to the Constitution.
Okay, it's implied from the express powers that there are certain things you can do in order to do the express powers. And what was an example of that? Yeah, if you tax, you need a place to keep the money. So it doesn't say that you can make a national bank, but you can imply that a bank would help you tax better. So indeed, you have that power. Implied powers are very significant because as long as you can justify what you're doing helps you do something that you're supposed to do, basically, then that means that it's going to be allowable. That means it's going to be allowable. Anything else from Chapter 2 with federalism? While you think, just dropping back to the Constitution chapter real quick, we had the GPS article. The GPS article was a really good one. We had the FBI drug article.
These are all going to be on the test.
Yes.
Be prepared for them, yes. When you look at the FBI article, that one's a little bit more factual when you think about it because it starts to break down things like which drugs and how many times and how many years and whatnot. So maybe pay a little bit more attention to the specifics on that one. We had House. House was the guy dealing with the DNA evidence, if you remember. That one was a pretty good one. When is a case actually over? And then we had the sex offender one. This was one of the first times that we've addressed sex offenders so far and the residency laws where they could be punished, indeed, be forced to move, even if they've already been punished for having committed a sexual offense. They serve their time, even if it was 10 or 15 years ago. Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
That's the one where you're talking about how they were living in a neighborhood prior before they built the school, but if they decided to come in that neighborhood and build a school, then they would be forced to move.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. What's the Latin word for that law? Anybody? I heard it. Yeah, it's an ex post facto law. An ex post facto law literally means after the fact. And the thought is that you committed a crime, you were punished for that crime, and then 5 or 10 or 15 years later, they're going to add additional punishment on that. You may not have done anything wrong. You may be married, you may have a family, but you can have additional punishment after the fact because of the particular crime that you committed. And some people would say that's unconstitutional. Other people would say we got to look out for the kids. Go ahead.
Are you going to go over the article on the guy that confessed to the Catholic priest?
You know, that one wasn't really an article so much as it was a story. But that is a pretty good one, that Catholic confession. Did anybody want to talk about that one real quick?
Is it going to be on the test?
I think there's some possibility for that. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
There was a camera.
Yeah.
And they recorded the confession, and then the cops were allowed to use that.
The man was in jail accused of a triple murder, and then while he was in jail, he confessed to the triple murder to a Catholic priest. But as you said, there were cameras that were set up, and they actually captured his confession on tape, and the argument was whether or not it could be used. What did they ultimately decide?
Not to use it.
They ultimately decided not to use it because of the firestorm that came about. What groups came out and spoke out the most against using evidence to convict the triple murderer? Go ahead, Ben.
The religious group.
Actually, the churches. And why were the churches so upset?
Because they could walk into anyone's confession and find out anything they want.
If you can do it to the Catholics, then you can do it to any other faith as well. And religion has a higher standard than just being able to come in like that. Yes?
Violating your right to religion?
First Amendment freedom of religion is exactly what they argued. And some people in this, if you remember, said if you've got doctor-patient confidentiality, if you've got attorney-client privilege, if you've got psychologist-patient, types of bonds, then indeed your religious figure and yourself, you should have that bond too.
It wasn't Catholic.
But he wasn't Catholic, which actually made it even a little bit more complicated. So some people would say there shouldn't be that bond because he doesn't even practice that particular faith. Talisa, did you want to say something?
I was going to ask you about the other article with the man and his wife. Like, his wife was, like, raped and murdered.
That was the House one.
Oh,
Yeah, that was the House one. Please make sure that you got that one. Please make sure that you got that one. Indeed, that one, just to give you an update on that, is coming up to the Supreme Court. Not specifically dealing with him, but they are dealing with the use of DNA in all crimes where DNA would not have been a valid evidence before. And the thought is that they're going to offer a ruling that will basically say if you committed a crime, the thought is that you will be allowed to get a retrial if DNA wasn't allowed then, if indeed this case goes the way it could in the Supreme Court. So the very thing of allowing everybody in for retrials and endless appeals even, it could very easily happen. I had given y'all the assault on separate powers article. That was the one, if you remember, talking about George W. I had given y'all, and that was the one dealing with Jose Padilla and the wiretaps. We talked a lot about that in all of the classes. What's that?
Assault on, what's the title?
Separate powers.
Assault on separate powers. And that was an article that was kind of dealing with separation of powers and checks and balances. We also had a really blurb of an article talking about how Congress could set up the Supreme Court membership. So that one is another example of a check and balance. That one was how to keep the Supreme Court in line. It was a real short one. Anything else from Chapter 2 as far as terms?